we see you, we find strength to face the day. In your presence, all our fears are washed away. And we see you, we find strength to face the day. In your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come every way among us. We welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come every way among us. We welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Hosanna, 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 Hosanna. The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I'll worship your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, worship your holy name. You're rich in love and you're slow to anger. Your name is great and your heart is kind. For all your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I'll worship your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come. Still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, worship your holy name. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, worship your holy name. Worship your holy name. Lord, I'll worship your holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, worship your holy name.
morning. 10 o'clock and you're all here, right? Larry, that doesn't mean you get this for half an hour free. Well, good morning. Welcome to Temple Baptist this morning. I have a bunch of things I'm going to run through this morning. I was thinking if you guys would like me about halfway through the week, we'll talk about something at home and so listen closely as I run through a bunch of things this morning. Last week I announced the opportunity if you were interested in giving towards data. I'll just get that high level. We did 10 years ago for the CMA, we did Africa, and the CMA became very close to data and family. 4 years ago, 4 years after that, they did it. And now one of the children has a specific needs relates to the science. So if you're interested in that, the first round of medical procedures will be about $1,000. If you have an interest in contributing, you have this week, you have to do that, but please talk to my wife, Mary, or Doris, and that gets registered. Also today, congratulations to graduates. Parents, they made it. So, off on your own, not college to go, pay your own bills, right? Doesn't quite work that way yet. A couple things in bold that I just want to highlight. Camping season is coming up for Christmas Spring Camp. Those are all listed in the bulletin. And again, just for clarification, if you are in elementary or junior high or senior high, our church has an office who is paying 50% of the registration. So please contact the church office and we will help as it relates to upcoming schedules. So this part's got to listen up. So what's happening, Larry, Steve, what's happening over this week? So here is the schedule as it stands today. On Thursday the 6th, Larry and Megan will be packing up. So there's a couple dynamics here that make this transition interesting. The first one is Steve and his family are going to rent and move into the house that Larry and Megan are living in. So there is no overlap here because they want to live together. And so that makes this a little bit interesting. The second thing on the praise note is Terry has already taken a job at ARFC, and she will start there on Monday the 10th. And so here's what's going to happen on Thursday the 6th. Larry and Lane are going to pack the truck. On Friday the 7th, Steve and Terry are going to unpack their truck. So stay tuned, watch emails, we'll be moving hands. Then we're going to meet people for on the 9th, that following Sunday, Larry will still be here. Larry will be here. Steve will be here. Pastor Randy will be here. Larry will come back to us that day and there'll be a Pastor McGavin and Horace, wherever it is. And so that will be on the 9th. The following week on the 16th, that weekend, Steve has to go back one more time. We have a wedding that Saturday, and his church wants to have a farewell party for their family on the 16th. So on the 16th, Chris Holt's going to be preaching that Sunday.
Yeah.
And then on the 23rd will be the first official Sunday at the airport. I'm just going to pause and say, if anybody have any questions, because I just went through a lot. Everybody's going to go home and say, I did not hear that. That's not what Kelly said. So again, Larry's here this week and 2 more weeks. On the 9th, everybody will be here. Larry and Lane will be leaving the 9th of the 10th. 16th, Chris will be here, and the 23rd, Steve will be here. So that's what's going on in the life of our church. There's a lot happening at the end here. This thing I got going on Fort Steve. The job and the health. So if you have any questions, ask. But that's where we're at. We're excited that God has called to us and will continue to bless us. For the summer also, I just want to announce as it relates to Steve being in the office, we'll be hiring stuff. Let's move on to prayer time. Memorial Day weekend. So, certainly, this is a weekend where we remember those who have served and give us the opportunity to be here and worship God. Without people coming to the country, and that's really something that this place is really exciting. So, continue to remember those who have served, thank those who are currently serving on our prayer list right here. It's pleasure to have you deployed at home. Clean up your love to your family in this town. Just a show of hands, but let's have those stand. How many of you have served? Who's here this morning who has served? There we go. I knew he was there. Thank you to you two guys and to everyone else who was up with us. There's many other things to pray for, and Heavenly Father, we just come to you this morning and thank you for Father, we thank you for the opportunity that Father, as we look forward to a lot of transition going on in our church, we pray that you guide us, graduates, Lord, we just thank you for all these kids who have fulfilled their commitment. Lord, those who are not people who are Good morning.
Morning.
My name is John Lynch. Today's scripture reading is from John 13, verses 1 through 5. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in need, he loved them to me. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God, and he was going back to him, rose up from supper, he laid aside his outer garments, paid a cake in the towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into the basin, disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for another day of your truth in this world. Lord, I thank you for the people here at BC. Lord, I pray that you will be Pastor Larry, the future Jesus. Lord, I pray that you will just, as Kathy has just put the words in the words of your wisdom, open our hearts and our minds. Lord, I pray for the First Baptist Church in Lincoln, with their senior pastor, Rich Cook. And I pray for Norman Bible Swan River, and all of us people and the service to Jesus' name.
Man, would you stand, please? Those who are young enough can slip away to children's church. The rest of you greet one another and say what you feel like saying. Good morning. Thanks for the prayer. Well, awesome. Thank you much. God bless. Find your seat if you would. Actually, a pretty good group here today. I kept hearing family after family that's going to be gone for the holiday weekend, and I thought, well, I'm going to preach to Elaine. Not that she didn't need it. That was supposed to be funny. And I'm very, well, it's supposed to be. Let's see. We were so excited last Sunday with an overwhelming clarity and unity and affirming God's call in Pastor Steve and Terry's life and the boys there. And we were so excited until it dawned on us we just got fired. So, yeah, the elders called a meeting right afterwards and says, well, Larry, you're done. You're fired. So, no, they didn't. Thank you for all the encouraging words. Several have asked, have you any idea where you're going next? And our plan right now is to move our stuff. So one more time, Elaine and I are not loading the truck. You are. Help, help, help. She's no help at that at all. Oh, no. I planned to say something next. If I had any idea what it was, I would say it. But the reality is we don't know where we're headed. IPM is at work trying to find us a place. Another church looking for a homeless couple to lead them. So we're looking forward to whatever God's choosing to do in his time. Thank you for being an awesome church to come alongside and just be a part of evaluating yourself and what God wanted to do during the interim process here. It's been an exciting period. Now, somebody said this morning, Larry, you've got 3 more shots today and 2 more to straighten us out. I said it took Randy 27 years. He's slow. I couldn't possibly get that done in this time. No, I'm very grateful for a strong church to be able to pass the baton to on the 9th. So looking forward to that. Let's get into the book. For those of you who are our guests, and by the way, much of Randy's family's here and friends, so grateful to have you here today as well. For those of you who are our guests and not have been a part of this series called Portraits of Christ, let me just remind you that the Gospel of John, from which these portraits are taken, from which these portraits are painted really verbally, one sentence, one phrase, one word at a time. As you walk through the 21 chapters, you can look at 21 portraits. And as you look at them, they all say basically the same thing. It's described in the last chapter of the book where the author, John, says, many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples and others. And he goes on to say, and I suppose that the whole world cannot contain the books that could be written, the volumes that could be written to describe and portray for you Jesus and the work that he did. But these are written that you might believe. Emphasis, that you might what? Come on, church. You might what? Believe. Believe in the basis of our salvation. And what is that? That Jesus is the Son of God. And I've taught you to reverse that phrase to get its emphasis. The phrase Son of God declares that he himself is deity, God the Son. And as God the Son, all our hope is built on his deity. Let me take you back just briefly here at setting this the stage for the portrait this morning to that place in Matthew where Jesus asked a wonderful question of the disciples. Who do men say that I am? Every time I think about that question, I'm enamored with the reality that the disciples knew what the world was saying that Jesus was like, who he was. It's pretty significant because I think that's something missing in the Western culture. Sometimes we get so comfortable inside the walls where together we worship God that we forget that our role is to move out into the mission field, into this world, and make him known to the point that we ought to be able to answer the question, who do our neighbors, co-laborers, the people that we work with or serve with outside these walls, who do they think Jesus is? The disciples knew the answer. I fear we do not. And I pray that that will change and become ever more a reality that we'll know the answer. Who do men say that I am? Some say you're the Elijah or one of the prophets. But who do you say that I am? And Peter, who most often rushes into the room mouth first, right? Are you here? Yeah, he usually answers not in the most spiritual way to begin with. Initially responds with the most spiritual statement known to man. The very foundation of our faith rests upon what he's about to say when he says, "Thou art the Christ, the Messiah, God, the living Son." You are God. You are deity. You are the Son of God. And what did Jesus say next? Upon this rock, not Petros, pebble, but upon, if you will, this boulder. What boulder? The basic foundational rock of our salvation is the deity of Jesus Christ that Peter just announced. Upon that rock, I will build my, say it, church. I'll build it. So that's what the book of John is all about. This whole reality that Jesus is God the Son. Now we come to a portrait today. It humbles me. I stand in awe every time I think about this 13th chapter of John and the portrait of Jesus that's painted here. The book opens with, He's the Word. In the beginning is the Word, who was with God and who was God, who made the worlds, and without him was not anything made that was made. He is God, seated at the right hand of the Father. And now he's come into the world, and at the age of 30 began his ministry, one of the last acts of his ministry. Lofty creator, God in the flesh, becomes a servant to his own followers. A servant that did what only slaves would do in that day. Very often in intra-ministry, I refer to the next leader, lead pastor, as servant leader. This is the passage that is the reason I often say servant leader. Sometimes, just to give a little bit of chuteology here, an observation, for it's worth only 4 cents with inflation. Sometimes I think the church misunderstands what servanthood is. A servant leader is not somebody who does whatever everybody wants him to do. I tried that for the first 20 years of ministry. It gave me an ulcer. Literally gave me an ulcer. That's not the goal of servanthood. Paul made that clear when in the book of Galatians he said to those believers, am I a pleaser of men? Am I here to serve men? If I am a pleaser of men, then I could not be and would not be a servant of Christ. A servant leader serves foremost Christ and the people for whom Christ died. It doesn't mean he does everything everybody wants him to do. I wish I had an hour to park here. I am going to take an extra half hour here, John. Yeah. Servant leaders. That's what Jesus was. Would you walk in the text with me and watch how it is that he moved toward this servant act? It starts as the text opens with what Jesus knew. Jesus knew, verse 1, that his hour had come to depart out of this world. Let me park there for a second with you. He knew that his hour had come. The word hour here does not obviously refer to 60 minutes, what we know is an hour. He's referring to several days that were the most difficult season of his life. He's referring to the time when he is about to be whipped, to be before that to be rejected by his own who cried, crucify him. He'll be nailed to the tree, buried in the tomb. As he gives up the ghost and says it is finished on the cross, you remember the midday sun turned to the midnight darkness. The rocks rolled away from the tombs and the dead lived, to the point that one centurion said, this could not happen unless this was the Son of God, God the Son. He's referring to the hour he would die and then be placed in the tomb. And spend 3 days there that were filled for a while with hopelessness for the disciples who had followed him. They were crouching in shadows, hiding for fear they were next. What occurred then? The great victory of Easter Sunday, when up from the grave he arose with a mighty triumph for his foes. And then he spends about a month and a half appearing to above 500 witnesses, not the least of which was his own disciples. And then he, from a mountaintop, was transcended. He was taken into heaven in the presence of some of his followers. And as they stood gazing, an angel said to them, "Why stand you here gazing? This same Jesus shall come again in like manner as you have seen him go." I haven't talked to you about his return, but he's coming soon. I have every confidence in that. And that better be the motivation of our life every morning, every day. Yo? No, yo, don't forget me. Yeah, no. He knew the hour, the season in which he would die, raised from the dead, ascend into heaven was coming. The hour that he then would depart out of the world. And the word depart is a strong word there. Carries the idea, a nautical term, leaving one port to arrive at the next port. Jesus is leaving the earth to arrive back to where he came from, the right hand of the Father. So I'm about to leave, he says, and there's something I need to tell you. I know I'm departing. There's something you need to know. He could talk about 1,000 things to drive the point home. He could talk about finances. He could talk about family. He could talk about physical health or the loss of it. He could talk about the pain that's coming for his own disciples, the world against him and them. That's not what he talks about. Nobody could have penned this save the Son of God and the Spirit of God, who saw this as the most critical thing to be heard as he was departing. What is it? Well, we're not there yet. We're still talking about what he knew. He also knew that the Father had given all things into his hands. The original is a little bit obscure here. Kind of carries the idea of both from a root word that talks about stormy conditions, and then a root word that is more connected to the word hands here. It's the hollow. Everybody cup your hand like this. Make sure your neighbor's doing it. Everybody participate. Got your hand cupped? Now close it. What was in the hollow is closed around, controlled by, captured by. He has the power to keep in his hands that which God places there. Who is it that God places into the palm of the hand of his Son? So much so that when you come to him, not one can be lost. So much so that Jesus can say, of all that the Father through the storms of life has placed in the palm of my hand, I have lost none. Not one. We are kept. We are secure. This very word is one of the main reasons I believe in eternal security. Not the least of which is from the book of John chapter 3, verse 16, that placard you see at every football game. What's the end of the verse say? Whoever believes on him has everlasting life. How long is everlasting? Hello? Everlasting is lasting forever. No end. Why do we have everlasting life when we believe in the Son? The answer is because all of us, as well as all things that happen to us, even the storms of life, are placed in the hollow of his hand. They're in his grip, and we are secure within him. Amen. Knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand under his control, as he's about to depart from the world, he's not losing control. The disciples are not losing their security because he's absent. One of the reasons we looked at last Lord's Day is because he would send the Spirit. But watch what else he knew. He knew who was to betray him. Here's where the storm and the hollow of his hand are so critical. They're connected. He knew that Judas, full of Satan, controlled by the evil one himself, would betray him. Do you know what the word betray means? It means to deliver into the hand of another. Is that pretty cool? Or what? What did we just read? We are in the hand of the one who is in absolute control. We're in the hollow of his hand. And Peter thought he could Judas thought he could take control and remove the Son of God, God the Son, from the hand of the Father and place him into the hand of the Roman officials to be crucified. Had God lost control? Was the Son of God, who humbled himself and left the throne of glory, ever out of the hand of the Father? There was one point, and one point only. It's when he cried from the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? But even in that, God was still in control. All was in his hand, making even the separation of himself from his Son work for our good, our eternal, everlasting life. What a message, right? So he knew who would betray him. Watch now what he did. He knew he was leaving. He knew he'd be betrayed. He knew that the Father would put everything under his control, in his grip, in the hollow, safely us put there in his hand. And this lofty God who had all control said, I want to teach my disciples one thing that they'll never forget. Again, it's not about finances, not about physical health, not about the stuff we fret and stir over. What is it about? It's about being a servant like him. Watch how he teaches this lesson. He does it by walking over to a bowl. And as he's walking over to that bowl of water, he picks up the free-flowing garment and tucks it into, if you will, his belt. He girded his loins, taking the form of a servant. Only slaves did that when they were working, doing their the bidding of their master. And Jesus, the master of the disciples, the Lord of the universe, girded up his loins, became a servant, and started washing the disciples' feet. This part of it, time only allows me to brush over by sharing with you this reality. It is to be noted that this took place at the end of the meal, not the beginning. I'm not sure exactly why, but again, worth 4 cents. Can I give you some chuteology again here? Will you stay long enough for that? I think he was just watching. It is an opportunity to expose the heart of his own followers. You see, the servants would wash the feet before the meal, because laying down at the table, not tables like we eat at, just lower tables, and they often laid down, their feet would be close to each other, and their feet would be dirty from traveling the desert land. So before they ate, it was a part of cleanliness at the table. The slaves would come without even being asked and wash the feet of each guest at the table. But this was a borrowed house, and there was no master, there were no slaves there, only the master of the universe and his followers. Will you, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, and you quote the rest. Which of you will wash the feet of the others at the table before we eat? And nobody did. So at the end of the meal, Jesus, I think, is pointing out, guys, you've missed this one point. And I think the reason we know they'd missed it is because often when following him, they'd be debating with each other and in contention with each other as who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Can I sit at your right hand, or can I sit at your left? In the kingdom, where's the servant's heart? Not there. Pretty powerful lesson he's just taught them, isn't it? At the end of the meal, since none of them served, he at the end girded up his loins and washed their feet. Now what he said, he came to Simon Peter to wash his feet, and Simon said, I'm not having any of this. There you go, that's Peter. You're not washing my feet. Oh, but if I don't wash your feet, you have no share with me in the kingdom which is to come. Then if that's true, don't just wash my feet, wash my whole being. And you know the text, many of you do. Jesus goes on to say, oh, you don't need to be washed. He who has been bathed in whole does not need to be washed after he's been bathed. You just walk in a dirty world, and you need that walk, that filth that you catch as you walk in the world. You need to deal with it by the water of the word, the washing of the feet. Oh, what do I say about this? But what a portrait. What a picture of the work of the servant leader, who whenever any appealed to him saying, save me, wash me by the blood, you are fully, completely, totally cleansed by the blood of the Lamb. What can wash away my sin? Yeah, that's a generational answer. Nothing but the blood. To the point I'm forensically clean, legally declared innocent, not guilty. For the one whose blood was spilled for me was legally declared guilty. So I'm innocent. I no longer need to be bathed. I've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. I am forever secure, and God sees me in his perfect Son, seated at his own right hand. I can't fathom the wonder of that. I never shall. But this I know, I never need to be asked to be bathed again. For once bathed in the blood, forever, forever, forever cleansed. But I walk with a bunch of dirty Baptists. Oh, Baptists. We all, don't we? Walk in a dirty world. And we sometimes get in a messy, messy place where we need forgiven. Not declared innocent again, for we've never lost that forever relationship, but rather, the portrait, the picture here declares loudly, when we walk in a dirty world, before we can eat at his table, if you will, before we have fellowship with him, we have to confess our sins, be washed by the word that convinces us of our sin, our feet washed, if you will, to be restored, not to a relationship with God, but to fellowship with him. All that's at the washing of the feet. Now, what he had to say to all, and you got to give me just a couple more minutes here. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Reasoning from the greater to the lesser, right? Do you know when it comes to lording, leading, exalting, in our culture, it's reversed. Let me see if I can explain that to you. Typically in our culture, they are exalted who have a lot of people serving under them, serving with them, serving them. How many people are you over at work is the question. Jesus' question is reversed. The greatest in the kingdom is not those who are over others, but his question is not, how many are you over? It's how many are you serving? The least shall be the greatest. Right? I don't know if anything that will bring harmony and oneness and clarity to a church, Christ-likeness to a church, like the heart of one who is willing to serve, a church filled with servants like Christ. Your turn. So he says, if you know these things, what things? The things he knew that he just shared. If you know that I was departing and all things are given into my hand and that you're in the hollow of my hand, and you know there will be those who oppose you, like Judas opposed him. If you know those things, and you know also that the Lord washed the disciples' feet, the Lord setting the example for you and me, his followers. If you know those things, and if you do them, if you become one who outdoes all the rest in washing each other's feet. If you do what he did, then what occurs? Blessed. Happy is the core meaning of that word blessed. God knows we're not happiest when we're lording over. We are happiest when we're serving under him like he served his people. Is that the exact opposite of the culture we live in, or what? What does that word blessed tell you? I grieve, looking back over 5 decades of ministry, I grieve over just a handful of people who seem to be so unhappy, as if God had never blessed them, had never given them joy, never given them anything to be filled with gratitude over. There are a few names and a few faces that come to mind. And as much as you try to come alongside and help, they're not happy. Maybe this is the key reason why some are so sad so much of the time. They've tried to be lords instead of servants and slaves of Christ. Happy are you when you're a servant. And then he added, I'm not speaking of all of you. There was one, and there will always be those among us who stir up out of loss of joy and loss of a servant's heart, never developed a relationship with him. Always stirring the brethren. Please, please, please. Understand that your problems don't end when Elaine leaves. Hello? Maybe I mean when Larry leaves. You're not over. There will always be some among us. That's okay. God has us in the palm of his hand. I would not be doing my job as an interim if I did not add to that. And your problems will not be over because of a power lifter becoming your pastor. They're not over then either. Maybe another way of saying it, Pastor Steve's not your Savior. Just like Larry and just like Randy have never been. There's only one Savior. And our role, and Pastor Steve's role, is not to take you by the hand and comfort you through life, but to walk with you through your seasons and hours, placing your hand in the hand of the one that you're secure in alone. It's not about those who stand in front of you and teach you. It's about the one they teach you about, Jesus, the servant. And all who care to said. Just stand with me, please. Wow, Father, this text is so convicting and convincing. You've never asked us to bleed as did your Son Hebrews declares that. You simply ask us to lay ourselves aside and become servants of Jesus by serving one another in such an effective and humble way that the community takes note of the way we treat each other in your family. By this all men will know you're my disciples, if you're loving, if you're servants of each other. Help us to grow in that. I praise you and I thank you for so many within this body who have loved on us. May they love on their next leader, but even more importantly, love on one another as Christ loved and served his own. Help us to do the same. For Jesus' sake, amen.